Ladies and gentlemen, dreamers and doers, seekers of purpose and fulfillment, welcome to Passion on Purpose, the podcast that sets your soul on fire and ignites the spark within you. I'm your host, Steph Hilfer, and I'm beyond thrilled you're here. Passion on Purpose features leaders, experts, and sometimes me on center stage. We put the spotlight on visionaries, entrepreneurs, leaders, experts, and everyday heroes to share their journey of self-discovery, enthusiasm, and unwavering determination. We'll explore how they use their passion and purpose to fuel their brand. Alongside our leaders, we'll provide practical tips, actionable advice, and wisdom from our experts across various fields. So if you're ready to unleash your inner fire, shake off the doubts and insecurities, and pursue a life of purpose with unbridled enthusiasm, then let's dive in. All right, guys, we are back with another episode of the Passion on Purpose podcast. And today our leader on center stage is Jonathon Kendall. He is the co-founder of Virtual Worker Now. And I'm so excited to do as we always do and jump on in and go deep in understanding more about Jonathon's passion and purpose for his business. Thank you so much for being here, Jonathon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm going to just dive in like we do and ask you, what is your why?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really big question. Okay, I think since I was little, I've always been a leader and even a leader of leaders. Like I've always been like the captain, and then I was the president, and then I thought, no, let me be the president of the state thing instead of just my school. And, so I think that there's, whether you want to call it your calling or what just happens by destiny or whatever, we're all a little bit different. And for whatever reason, I just had that skill. And so I've always thought that my goal is to basically be a leader of other people. I don't think that I have some hard skills, like, my background is in copywriting and digital marketing and systems, but a lot of that's, other than the deep psychology of why people buy things, a lot of that changes. So, what was working 6 months ago or a year ago, especially with AI, is not necessarily going to work right now. The algorithms are always changing in digital marketing. Softwares are always being updated. Someone has something on their resume that sounds amazing, but it's actually going to slow them down nowadays. So I don't think that I'm like, oh, I'm going to be the best at this one thing, but I like the meta patterns of, general success and leadership and why people do what they do. And so if I'm, called for anything, like I want to be a good sounding board for other people to be able to express their passions.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying too is like this ability to lead others and lead leaders kind of came innate to you, like most of your life, I would imagine.
Yeah, I used to think, so I went through a phase. I was the CEO of a company called MentorBox, and it was basically a competitor of Masterclass, and we had, instead of audio books like Audible, it was video books, and we had really high level people like New York Times #1 best-selling authors, right? So Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, like the top of the top, and books that everyone would recognize. And we had them come to the studio in San Francisco. It was proper San Francisco startup. This is really where I cut my teeth in digital marketing. And people would come there, and I had to read all of the books because we had to know the book pretty much as well as the author did. Because sometimes, weirdly, 4 years later, they forgot, what was in chapter 3. And, it's like they've moved on, and, we would buy like 5,000 copies of their book and send them to our subscribers. And so in exchange, they would come and they would talk about their book, basically summarize their book on camera. And so I went through this phase of 3 years where I read like 500 nonfiction books. And at the time, at that moment in my life, I was like, everything can be systematized. You got to do this and do this. And I was very, by the bootstraps, you can do it type of vibe. And not to say that I don't believe that anymore, but I think a lot is DNA. And the more you kind of get through the self-development and basic business and basic sales and basic branding, you start to think about history and psychology, and you start to read things that are a little bit more complex, and philosophy And a lot of that has led to me to be even doing like reading some books about biology. And I feel like DNA has a lot to say in, who we are and personality even, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that, just like my wife, for example, like her brain is very creative in ways that mine is not. And she thinks I'm kind of silly and how I can't think of, like if you give me a blank page, I'm kind of like, I don't know what you want me to do. Give me a goal. What am I solving for? What's the equation? Like I can do that. Whereas she might take way longer than me to make what I think is like a simple decision, but it's because her brain is thinking about it from like every single angle. And so there's pros and cons with that. And I don't think that's how we were raised. I think that there's a DNA aspect to that. So I think that's a very long answer to, I think a lot of it's innate.
Yeah, no, and it's a good answer. I like that. I talk about that a lot because I think, especially saying, your why is that you want to be that fuel and that person who can help other leaders kind of reach their potential. I don't think it's exact words you said, but that's what I pulled from what you shared. And then you had said that's something that you just had always gravitated towards. I like to, and I speak on this show a lot about the innate things, the things that come innate to us. We often, and this was personal experience for myself as well, we often take them for granted and we don't see them as skills or special or valuable, or imposter syndrome is such a trending like buzzword right now, so dare I even speak of it, but I think that's where that creeps in a lot, is because things come innate to us and we're a natural born leader, we're natural leader of leaders. If we aren't introspective, if we don't tap into and understand that those innate things are skills and that not everyone gets them, like your point with your example of you and your wife, we could look at ourselves and see ourselves as imposters. So I think it's super pertinent to talk about in the business world and in our passionate world as well. I want to step back before we keep diving down that one. So you'd said for as long as you can recall, you've always just been a leader, and I love that. I have some fun stories of that. But I want to hear what Jonathon as like a young child was doing, whether it's a Jonathon at 5 years old, Jonathon at 10 years old, maybe Jonathon at 15 years old. Like, what can you reflect back on where that natural leader kind of started to shine for you? And it might not be the first moment, but the one that pulls your memory right now.
Yeah. So I grew up in both Michigan and Ohio sort of equally. So my first 6 years were in Michigan, and then I went to the University of Michigan for college, but high school and middle school, I lived in Ohio for, was where my dad had a job. And I remember in Ohio is really big into Olympic wrestling. That's like a big, like real wrestling is big in Ohio and Pennsylvania, that region of the country. And so my school was, ranked really high in the nation for wrestling. And we had a lot of people that ended up doing really well, like all the way to the Olympic level. And so we started when we were like 5 years old. So, just the same way that like T-ball, but we had the same thing, but for wrestling. And I remember, just getting obsessed with that because one of my friends at the time started in first grade, and his, maybe there's some ego involved, honestly, like in hindsight, but his name would always be on the loudspeaker for like the whole school. It was like, Nick Wiley, first place at this tournament, blah, blah, congratulations, everyone's clapping. And I was like, what's this wrestling thing? So then I started in second grade because I actually liked him. Like, how is he getting all this recognition? And then did that for a really long time, ended up doing a really high level, was on like the Ohio All-Star team and was a captain of the team. But then by ninth grade, I stopped. Even the year before, I actually went to a national tournament in Disney World and got second place. So I was like,
oh, nice.
And I was training at the Olympic Training Center. Like I played at a really high level, but then I quit mostly because of my relationship with my dad, and it just was sort of toxic, and I didn't want to do it anymore. But I switched to speech and debate, forensics, right? Which was kind of an opposite extreme.
Total,
so then I was
total
like
360 or 180. There we go, 180.
Yeah. And my best friend was the like lead in the theater. He was the lead in like the musical theater. And so then I joined the theater group. And I think that in hindsight, that was the greatest thing ever because now I'm comfortable, speaking on podcasts like this and being a an executive or owning a company. We have over 400 employees in my company. And so whenever we do an all hands meeting, or if I speak at an event or something like that, it just having the ability to articulate what you want to say and not feel nervous about it is an incredible skill, much more than wrestling. And so I'm actually very happy that I did that. So all that is to say that, I think whenever someone competes at a pretty competitive level at anything, whether it's a sport or, theater or anything in between, I think it can teach you real stakes, and I think that's good, when you're a kid. And I just grew up in a very competitive school in everything, and even my speech and debate team, we would fly around the country to tournaments, and we weren't just, it wasn't like me versus my rival school down the street. I remember going to Atlanta and Salt Lake City and Los Angeles and going to these tournaments and speaking in theaters and all that kind of stuff. So that was, my childhood was very, I played tennis as well, but it was very competitive, I think. And so that probably trained me for entrepreneurship pretty well.
I find it fascinating that before you're even you're so driven, right? You're driven, you're competitive, you do things at a high level, right? If you're going to do it, you go all in. It is what I'm hearing from these stories you shared. But before you even started with wrestling, which, by the way, my husband listens to the shows and he's probably definitely applauding right now. He loves wrestling, especially for younger children, just because it teaches them so much skill, patience, reservation. There's so many really good things about wrestling. So I was excited when you said that, because we talk about that all the time. But even before you dove into that, you heard your competitiveness, that innate competitor in you, and that leader, and that desire, person who's desiring some recognition. And I don't mean that in an egotistical, and that and ego has such a negative connotation, but I wish it didn't, because it's such a powerful word to help us understand our emotions and our feelings. But even in that first grade Jonathon, pre-wrestler, he hears Timothy Keller, or whatever his name is. I'm probably getting it wrong, but you hear him over the loudspeaker, and you're motivated by that. You're, like you said, that natural leader in you was there. And that was kind of the catalyst to get you to compete, to get into the ring, so to speak. Right? Have you ever really, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, 100%. One thing that I've thought about in sales and copywriting, there's this idea that we only buy, if you ask why enough, then you eventually going to get to why do people really buy what they buy? And I've heard that there's only a few things. So one is money, but money is a base for everything else, and because money can help with everything. So obviously people want an ROI, especially in any B2B business. It's what is the ROI? So money is obvious, but another one is mating. So you want basically companionship or community, or a significant other. People do that. Another thing is esteem. So this, I think, is actually what we were getting to, is that, Nick was had this very high esteem in the school because everyone was wow, he's so good. And so there's probably part of me that wanted to be in a position of people thought of me as wow, that's, esteem. And then also, another one would be mastery, right? Just some kind of the love of the game. I want to get better and better and better at it. And then, we also buy things for safety, just the basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But anyways, so each person, or some people buy things for freedom as well. But there's maybe let's say 5 to 10 base emotions of why everyone buys everything. And people, are more or less on the spectrum. For me, money is very important, but it's because of freedom. Mm-hmm. So, we were talking before the podcast came on, and it's I live in Cairo. I have a place in Puerto Rico. I'm going to the United States. I've been to Europe 6 times this year. I'm moving to, I like movement and freedom. And, I like that energy that I can work from my computer. So money is actually just a tool for freedom for me. Mm-hmm. But, other people, have different things, but there was obviously that little, esteem button was pushed, in the little Jonathon, and was hey, I want to be recognized for something. But then I think the cool thing about it is that, especially with wrestling more than anything, it's physical, and there's actual, at that level, it's not quite as violent, but it's fairly violent. There's literally, it's a controlled fight. And so you're shown very quickly that there's consequences. And there's like there are real consequences in the real world. Like you can literally get hurt at that level, or even if it's baseball, the consequences are you lost, like you actually lost. And I didn't grow up in a time where we got eighth place trophies, so you've lost. And I think that that's actually good, because it's like you're taught that there's consequences. So I remember the first tournament that I went to, like I got killed, just it was like, oh, it's the gap between, oh, I want to have my name on the loudspeaker and I got killed in my first practice is like, oh, okay, I got a pretty long mountain to climb here, before. And so, it probably took 4 years until I was any good. And so, it just that persistence and consistency and discipline and overcoming adversity and stoicism, it's all of those meta lessons are built into like childhood sports. I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, you also learned a lot of humility and in that, right? Going from this, like you said, esteem place, which I love the way you broke those different whys down, but this place of like, oh, okay, I want to be on the loudspeaker, to doing the work, being driven, showing up, putting your all in, to then get to that first tournament where you're like, okay, this is the moment I'm going to be on the loudspeaker, to being like, oh, like reality check. This is a little bit harder than you think, or it's not going to just go your way because you did X, Y, and Z. How has that, I think I just always love these conversations. They're so fascinating to me because there's so much in our upbringings that shape us. And I don't know if we always like take the time to go down that journey. But now, Jonathon, as a leader today, like, since we just went back down memory lane, what sort of values or what sort of lessons have you pulled out, whether intentionally or just by happenstance, that you continue to bleed into the team you have today? Like whether it's called core values or just the way that you choose to lead your team. What does that look like?
I think that probably the biggest one is playing at a level, like understanding that there's levels to the game. And because we had coaches that were literally in the Olympics, because our high school was ranked in the top 10 literally in the United States, and we would go to the big national tournaments. And so, bleeding all the way down to even the grade school team, it was fairly serious even at that level, because to be serious when you're 17, you have to start serious when you're 6, and there's no other way around it. And so we had people in the room that would come that were like, oh, this is an Olympic silver medalist, or this is someone that won the NCAA tournament, or this is a guest coach for the summer program that was, a 3-time All-American at Ohio State University or whatever. So it's one thing to be like, oh, I got an A on my, reading test in 2nd grade in my class. Like, that's fine. That is competition, and that's you versus yourself, and that can teach you something. But I think what happened was the same thing with my speech and debate team. We were literally like the national rankings. We were ranked 2nd in the nation, and I was the captain of that team. And so when you're playing at, there's 300 million people in the United States, obviously divide that by, 80
Grades.
years, you know what I mean? The grades, you know what I mean? It's not actually, and then how many people are actually in wrestling? I understand, I can reverse engineer the math. So you're not the best out of everyone, but nonetheless, you are competing against a lot of people. And that, to bring this, around to business, is that I've never limited where I think is possible, because I think, and this is probably a lesson to a lot of people where it's like, hey, your mentors matter when you're young, because if someone's always saying, well, that's stupid, why would you think that way? Like, I remember when I was young, when people would say, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would always say, be the president of the United States. And both my parents and everyone in my school would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, there was no like, how dare you, or who do you think you are, trying to like, and I don't really have that goal anymore. But the point is that no one held me back. And I had this idea of like, yeah, I could win the Olympic gold medal. And if I choose to not continue, then that's my decision, but I could. And so I approach the same thing with my company. Like, we have over 400 employees, and I'm like, yeah, we'll get to 10,000. And it's not like a, maybe, I hope, maybe, I'm praying. It's like, right. No, we will. It might take 20 years, but like, as long as I continue improving and I play the infinite game and I don't stop, like, we'll get there. It's inevitable. Like I'm not gonna, like there's no doubt in my mind. And so I think that is probably, it's hard if you didn't have that growing up where people believed in you and you had these relationships with people that are at a very, very, very high level. You get caught up in the like local version of that, right? Where you're like, oh, the big guy in, the big fish in the small pond, where we had big fish in the big pond in my life when I was young. And so that made me dream, I think, a lot bigger. And also at the University of Michigan was a pretty wild experience. I didn't really learn anything like in terms of, I just didn't like in terms of like
book smart wise, right?
Book smart, like nothing, like nothing practical. But there also was that level where it's like your professor is like, the book you're reading is written by your professor, and you're like, what is this? That's weird. Like where the class, you're like, oh, the top 3 expert in the world in anthropology in this thing is like literally the person sitting right here. And so again, just checking off the boxes. If the meta lesson is probably just like choose your mentors wisely. And it's good to have people in your local area. That's fine. But also like, especially with social media, like don't like all of the literally the highest people are also available. And, don't hold yourself back.
I really love talking about that. And I think there's a lot of other examples where people are trying to say what we're talking about. Like, they say the summary of like your potential can be summarized by the potential of the 5 people you're closest to, right? And I love this idea of phases and kind of I picture them as like compartments, right? If we see ourselves in like compartment A, and compartment A started and ended, and that's where we feel good, that's where we'll stay. But if we like continue to know that and even know and acknowledge that there's a B, C, and a D, and these other like levels, maybe levels is a better. And I think we tend to get stagnant. We as in, different points in our life. It could be our whole life. It could be phases of our life. But then I think the more interesting thing is the power. I think one of the biggest power isn't just going from one phase to the next. I think that's super powerful. That's how we evolve. Obvious, right? But to me, and this is where I struggle, and maybe you've felt this too, is that when I then level up, let's call it level up, I struggle with looking back and thinking and almost resenting the previous self in that previous level. Because I'm like, why was I not this good? Why did I not, instead of recognizing, well, I'm just simply, I wasn't that good at that level, and I wasn't that educated or experienced or whatever the new level things I now have. I look back at those previous levels and I'm like, almost like I said, almost resentful. So I wonder if that's actually even a reason why we stifle ourselves. Just kind of that protective mechanism. I'm just kind of spitballing like
no, for sure.
Based off what you said, but
no, I think you're the old version of you died, and so some part of you is protecting your current self. And so that's, I think, one aspect of it. And another aspect of it is it's really hard. Because, Tom Bilyeu says your goals will require a sacrifice. And, the next level is going to require a sacrifice. And so there's a part of you that doesn't want to do what's necessary to get to the next level because it requires probably public failure a lot. And so you're like, oh, I'm going to, hold myself back because we're afraid of being kicked out of the tribe in our amygdala, and we don't want to be, and so we're actually like really fearful of this. And so 1, it's difficult and we want to be lazy and just do the easier thing. And then 2, we don't want our current self to die because we'd rather have homeostasis than step into this new thing that we don't even know what it is. We kind of predict it, but we don't really know. And then once you're there, usually what happens is you feel great about yourself, right? And to an extent, but you also think, well, I feel this way every time I get in shape again, where this is like a roller coaster, I think, of all humans in terms of, versions of how in shape you are. And when I'm consistent for 6 months, whatever I'm doing, I'm always like, why were you such an idiot? Like, this isn't that hard. Like, just do the thing, just go to the thing. You actually feel better. Like, you have more energy. It's easier. Like you feel good about yourself. You look better. Your wife is happier. Like everyone's happier. And you just didn't want to do this thing. And then then you start to get kind of
Complacent.
and then you get
Yeah.
it's this yo-yo. And so I think that that's a part of it as well, where you once you get over the hump, you realize that a lot of the boogeyman was in your own head. And so then you're like, damn, that was not as difficult as I thought. And
Yeah.
why weren't you strong enough? So you're almost like, so the way I think about it, one of my mentors told me, he said, you should try to be embarrassed by who you were a month ago every month.
Ooh.
Meaning that, like, because we all look back and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did with that when I was 18. I can't believe I did. There's like these 5 stories that you tell yourself that you're just like so embarrassing, or, whatever it may be. Right now, you would never do anything like that now, which is why you're embarrassed of it, because you're like, oh my God, I was such an idiot. But imagine feeling like that every month. What that means is you're making some crazy fast progress. So it's actually a positive thing. But he said you have to couple it with forgiving yourself. Right. So it's a two-sided coin. So on the one hand, you're like, okay, I'm going to improve so fast that I'm embarrassed by what I didn't know a month ago, but I'm also going to forgive myself for not knowing what I know now, because how could I have?
Right.
And so, then it becomes a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle.
I love that. That's such a great way to frame it, because I think we feel that way anyway. We just don't acknowledge or put words to it. Maybe not every month, maybe every day, for goodness sakes. But I think definitely in phases of our life, it's so true. We all could kind of reflect back after listening to this and think about at least one experience where we're like, I would never even tell that story again. Maybe I would now because enough time has gone by, but and that's also our huge lessons learned, that. Those are, by being actually embarrassed, it means we've, like my husband says all the time, the best lesson is a bump, right? Because, you're going to remember that. And so I think embarrassment, especially for the type of people who be listening to this show and the type of people who are going to be going into entrepreneurship, we do that esteem, that ego, that pride. We really, most of the people who are listening to this are going to agree that that's really prideful in them. So they could probably handle the bump actually a whole lot easier than a little ego, hit. So, well, I can't even believe how fast this conversation is going. I've loved talking with you. I want to dive really quickly into how everything we've been talking about that makes you has bled into the work you're doing now with Virtual Worker Now. Tell me a little bit about what that is, who it's for, what kind of has gotten you the most excited about this co-founding of this. And then maybe this is a long 2-part question, but also a good way to get into your world so that listeners can dive in and learn more about you.
Yeah. So I'll give you the quick origin story. So I was the CEO and first employee, and then they ended up giving me equity in a company called MentorBox. And we had 200,000 students. And it was an online course platform, $7 a month, and sort of like Netflix, you get access to all of these courses, but they were surrounding authors and books. So things like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, or Presence by Amy Cuddy, or these types of books that are very well known. And we needed a lot of video editing, a lot of graphic design, a lot of copywriting, a lot of customer support. And in San Francisco, someone like that, base salary plus taxes plus insurance, is north of $100,000 payroll per person. And so, I mean, that's just the standard of living. If you want them to be able to pay their rent and buy groceries, that's what it is. And so we started to think, well, let's outsource some of this. And so we tried Fiverr and Upwork and various agencies and kind of everything, and probably spent $500,000 on the wrong things. And eventually my now business partner said, hey, I have this small agency that was doing video editing work. And he said, I can find you some people. He's half Canadian, half Egyptian. Well, not half and half. He has dual citizenship. And he says, I can find you some people. And I said, yeah, okay, cool. And so we tested some video editors. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then he says, I can get you a designer. Okay, wow, this is amazing. And then, hey, my COO needs an assistant. Okay, oh my God, that's amazing. Hey, you know what? We want to do phone, where we answer the phones, not just do email customer support. Hey, we'll build a team. And so we just kept on expanding. And then I started giving him referrals and referrals and referrals. And he said, hey, you know what? Instead of us giving you just a finder's fee or an affiliate commission, why don't you come on as my partner? Because I'm more of an operator. He's more of the kind of visionary and, sales and networking, and we might be a good partnership. And he's like, at some point, this is going to break. We're going to need systems, like it's one thing to have 10 people or 20 people. It's another thing to have 5,000. It's a totally different universe. And so he said, why don't you come on as a partner? And then similarly, what was, even though I was a CEO, it's still a job. And the other one I was 50-50 owner of, and eventually it tipped. And so since then, it's grown, really quickly in the last 4 years. And what we do is we're basically a backend, like a full stack backend solution for services. So companies will usually start with whatever their biggest problem is. So if you need a video editor for social media, we start there. If you need a copywriter for your email newsletter, we start there. If you need, one website, we start there. If you need a personal assistant, we start there. If you need a marketing assistant, we start there. If we want a customer, and so the idea is we have these different departments and department heads and recruiting for each department. But then our goal is to, after we solve your first problem, we become kind of your go-to solution. So whenever, as you're expanding, they say, well, you know what, virtual worker now we'll always have. So, hey, can you get me a cold caller too? Yeah, we'll get you that. Can you get me a social media team? Yeah, we'll get you that. And so then we just kind of expand together. We do only month to month, which our clients really like. So there's no long-term commitments. And what it does is it allows us to like expand and contract. So a lot of our e-commerce stores, for example, are like adding a lot of customer support for the Christmas season, but we don't feel bad. Yeah. And they don't feel bad for like, hey, we know you only really need it for November and December, and we're going to pull back in January. They don't have to hire in-house.
Yeah.
We basically train their team internally because we already have people there. And so it just, these types of, we offer a lot of flexibility. And we're not like the craziest expensive for VAs. We're not the cheapest. We're like $7 an hour. So it's somewhere in the middle. But we stand by our quality. Everyone is, highly vetted and trained and everything like that. And so, yeah, that's what we do. I think our competitive advantage is that we are full stack. So a lot of agencies will just do like administrative VAs, whereas we do creative and administrative and marketing, and kind of, we have different departments, so we can help you with everything. And then I would say there's
servicing what areas of the world?
Mostly we work with Canadian, American, UK, Australia. Those are our clients, and we source from all over. We get that question a lot. I mean, we have a lot in Egypt and Lebanon, just because my business partner is in Egypt. I'm in Egypt right now, but we have from the Philippines and India and South America. We're fairly country agnostic as long as we find the right person.
Yeah, I love that.
And then. How do I get in touch? Okay, so
that's a good way to like kind of learn
interact.
more.
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel.
Perfect.
Just Jonathon Kendall. I just launched like a month ago, so that's good. I post 3 times a week, and then my Instagram, I post like 3 times a day. So there's always a lot of content on Instagram, so you can follow me in either one of those. If you search Jonathon with an O at the end, Kendall, you'll be able to find me. I'm usually the first person that pops up. And then for if you're interested in VAs, you can always just go to our website and schedule a call. And me and my business partner still take every single call because we think of them as relationships. And so it's not going to be some like salesperson. And we also won't even take any money on the first call. Like, it's a very relationship based thing. It's consultative, and we might tell you that you don't need a VA, and you should hire an ad agency instead. Like, I'm not
honest.
Yeah, we'll be really honest with whatever we think you need. And so there's, it's more of a consulting thing. And then if it ends up working out that you need something, we'll usually send you a bunch of resumes of people that we think would be a good fit. And, our sales cycle is very long. So, we're the opposite of high pressure sales. So don't worry about scheduling a call and talking with us. It's, we think very lifetime value.
Yeah, I love that. It's very refreshing because it tends to be the opposite in our world today. Yeah. It's get them in and then don't let them go. Hold on tight. Well, I truly believe in what you do as far as connecting business owners and like you said, Australia, Canada, US, UK, anywhere in the world. Honestly, I personally built my team with team members around the world, and it has been the most beautiful, amazing. I mean, I literally get teary-eyed every time I talk about my team. Gosh, I got to figure out how to control that. But it's been the most beautiful thing to work with people around the world because it was this unexpected blessing to learn more about other cultures and to just have these conversations with other people who've just lived life a little differently than you. And so, to me, the daily tasks of a job sure need to get done, but like the worldly understanding of myself and humans more has just been eye-opening and beautiful. And so I believe in what you do with connecting people with other people around the world. And I have also seen it work beautifully for my own agency and other agencies for that scale factor and for that, get out of the rat race, like you had mentioned very early on in our call. It's super powerful. So if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, check the show notes. Take Jonathon with an O, take him up on the opportunity to just have a call, have a no pressure call, see if this is a world that's supportive for you or helpful for you. As a personal advocate of this kind of structured, opportunity, I think you will be, and month to month, what a no-brainer. So I think you will be pleasantly surprised at the opportunities to help relieve a little load from yourself by just giving Jonathon a call. So thank you so much for coming on. I've loved this conversation. Any last things before we jump off?
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I'd love to have you on our podcast that we launched as well.
Yeah, I would love to learn more. We'll have to talk about that. All right, guys, until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Passion on Purpose podcast. I truly hope you got a lot of value out of this episode. So if you did, please rate, review, and share. If you are interested in being a guest on the show, whether a leader or an expert, please go to getvim.com/podcast and you will find our application page, or reach out to me directly and I can give you more information.